Welcome to Stardom Stories. In this story, we follow an unexpected journey with Baron Trump at Dallas Airport, where a routine flight spirals into a public spectacle, shedding light on the challenges of bias and prejudice. As the situation escalates, his mother, Melania Trump, steps in to defend her son and demand justice. Filled with tension and emotion, this story illustrates the importance of standing up against unfair treatment and discrimination in any situation. Join us for this compelling tale that challenges preconceived notions and teaches us about dignity and respect. The Dallas International Airport was bustling with activity on a humid summer morning. Travelers rushed from one terminal to another. Announcements echoed through the halls, and the clatter of rolling suitcases filled the air. Seated quietly at gate C-12 was Baron Trump, a tall and reserved 17-year-old. Baron was accustomed to the chaos of airports. Ever since his father, Donald Trump, had stepped down from the presidency, Baron had strived to lead a life away from the limelight. Today, he was traveling to New York to visit his older siblings. Wearing a plain gray hoodie and jeans, he blended seamlessly with the crowd, though his height made him stand out. He glanced at his phone, checking the time and scrolling through music playlists. Despite his calm exterior, there was an unease he couldn't shake. Something felt off. Across the terminal, Richard Holt sat with a steaming cup of coffee and a leather briefcase. A seasoned businessman in his 50s, Holt was waiting for the same flight. His sharp eyes scanned the room out of habit until they landed on Baron. There was something oddly familiar about the boy. Holt squinted, trying to place where he had seen him before. Then it struck him. The tall stature, the distinctive facial features. Holt's suspicions grew, but he said nothing, merely observing. Unbeknownst to Baron, Holt wasn't the only one watching him. A few rows behind him, a man in dark clothing and sunglasses sat silently, his phone pointed subtly in Baron's direction. The boarding announcement finally came. Passengers formed a line, presenting their tickets and IDs to the gate agents. Baron joined the first-class queue, his headphones dangling around his neck as he scrolled through messages. When it was his turn, he handed over his boarding pass. The gate agent scanned it, but before she could hand it back, a security officer approached. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said. "Could you step aside for a moment?" Baron frowned but complied, stepping out of line as curious eyes turned toward him. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. "We just need to verify your ticket and ID," the officer replied. Baron handed over his passport, trying to ignore the murmurs from nearby passengers. Some had begun whispering his name, while others speculated about the scene unfolding. The officer took Baron's documents to a nearby counter, where two additional security personnel joined him. Minutes passed, and Baron remained standing, his patience wearing thin. "I don't understand the delay," Baron said. "Everything's in order." One of the officers returned and said, "We just need to ask you a few questions. Please come with us." Baron hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "I'd like to know why I'm being questioned," he insisted. "This is standard procedure," the officer replied curtly. Reluctantly, Baron followed them to a small interrogation room near the security office. As they entered, one officer closed the door while the other began flipping through a clipboard of documents. Meanwhile, Melania Trump was sitting in her car, scrolling through her phone. She had planned to surprise Baron at the airport and see him off. However, peaceful morning was interrupted by a text from a friend. "Check Twitter. Your son's at the airport, and there's already a video of him being stopped by security." Melania's heart raced as she opened the app. A video showed Baron standing near the gate, looking calm but visibly uncomfortable as officers surrounded him. The caption read, "Former first son detained at Dallas Airport? Driver, take me to the airport immediately," she said, her voice firm. Inside the small room, the questions began. "What's the purpose of your trip?" one officer asked. "I'm visiting family in New York," Baron replied evenly. "Do you often travel alone?" "Yes." "And who purchased your ticket?" Barron narrowed his eyes. I did. The interrogation continued, each question more invasive than the last. Barron's frustration grew, but he kept his composure. This is unnecessary, he finally said. I've shown you my documents. If there's an issue, I'd like to call. When Melania arrived at the airport, she headed straight to the security office. Her heels clicked against the tile floor as she navigated the crowded terminal. Upon reaching the office, she pushed open the door without hesitation. What is going on here? She demanded, her voice icy. The officers turned, startled. One of them stammered. Mrs. Trump, we were just conducting routine checks. Routine checks? She interrupted. You've detained my son without cause. This is unacceptable. Barron looked up, relief washing over his face. Mom, I'm fine, he said. Melania turned to him briefly before addressing the officers again. I want to speak to your supervisor. Now. The supervisor arrived moments later, visibly nervous. After reviewing the situation, he admitted that the officers had acted on a vague alert that turned out to be a false alarm. This was a misunderstanding, he said. A misunderstanding? Melania repeated, her tone sharp. You've humiliated my son in public, wasted his time, and caused unnecessary stress. This is not how you treat anyone, let alone a minor. By now, a crowd had gathered outside the office, curious about the commotion. Melania stepped out, addressing the onlookers. My son has done nothing wrong. This incident highlights the importance of respecting individuals, regardless of who they are. The airport manager issued a public apology, and Barron's flight was rescheduled. On the flight to New York, Barron stared out the window, lost in thought. Melania sat beside him, her hand resting on his. You handled yourself well, she said softly. Thanks, Mom, he replied. But I hate being treated differently because of who I am. Melania nodded. You have every right to feel that way. But remember, your strength lies in how you respond to challenges. Barron looked at her and smiled faintly. I'll keep that in mind. The plane soared above the clouds, leaving behind the chaos of the morning.